Welcome to the first tasting video for Bourbon Brothers. My name's Sean, founder of Bourbon Brothers, and today I'm going to take you on a journey through 3 cracking bourbons that I'm sure you'll enjoy. What we're going to attempt to do each month is give you 3 different bourbons at 3 different price points. So sort of a value proposition, a mid-range, and then one of the higher tier bourbons so you can get a feel and find something that works for you and your budget. What I want to do with these tasting videos also is share some of the history of what we're drinking. Tell you some of the stories that are behind the distilleries and behind the bourbon. I think that's what really truly sets bourbon apart. The amazing history and these brilliant stories that are behind these terrific drams. The first bourbon we're going to look at today is Old Forester. Available for around $55 to $60 at almost every bottle shop you go into. It's a reasonably light bourbon at 80 proof. But for the money, I believe that Old Forester is one of the best bourbons you can grab. I'm quite comfortable putting it up against others in that sort of price point, and even a bit higher. You could pay $75 to $90 for Gentleman Jack, but Old Forester, for my taste, absolutely comes out ahead. It's why I was very keen to include Old Forester in our very first pack. It's the everyday pour in my house. Old Forester is a good bourbon on its own, it's good on ice, but it makes terrific cocktails. So whether you like your plain old bourbon and Coke, or whether you want to make an old fashioned, or just start experimenting with other bourbon cocktails, Old Forester just makes a terrific bourbon base for it. And there's a reason for that. Old Forester is produced by Brown-Forman, the same company that brings us the Jack Daniels range and the Woodford Reserve range, among others. Old Forester has a special story. It's been around since 1870, so it's celebrating its 150th year, which is amazing. Every pour of Old Forester has 150 years of tradition, knowledge, and history in it. Back in 1870, the founder of Old Forester, George Garvin Brown, was the first man to put bourbon in glass bottles. Prior to that, bourbon only came in barrels. And it's quite fitting that I'm filming this video today, because in the US, it's what's known as Repeal Day, the 5th of December, as that was the day that Prohibition was repealed in 1933. And that's important when we're talking about Old Forester, because when Prohibition came in 1920, Brown-Forman applied for and received the license from the US government to continue producing Old Forester for medicinal purposes. So in 1933, when Prohibition was repealed, Old Forester became the only remaining bourbon continuously sold by the same company before, during, and after Prohibition. So there's that history in each glass that you enjoy. I really get a kick out of understanding the history that's behind my glass of Old Forester. There are other brands under the Old Forester name that will cost you more, especially here in Australia. In fact, the Old Forester 1920 was just named by Fred Minnick. And if you don't know who Fred Minnick is, he's probably the most preeminent bourbon aficionado in the world. But Fred Minnick, just this last week, through a blind taste testing, named Old Forester 1920, kind of the big brother of this one, as the best value bourbon pick of the year. And it's really not a huge departure from the base Old Forester that we're going to be sampling today. So now that we know a little bit about the history of Old Forester, I think it's time we had a taste. So, very that classic bourbon colour. So, it really is. It just automatically, without even getting it up here, I'm picking up that orange, that florally orange flavour and a bit of seed of it. Yeah. That orange blossom, cedar. You really start getting some sort of bread warmth on it and sort of a buttery pancakey kind of nose on it. Yeah, I know this one well. Yeah, so it really does start off quite sweet, and then you get that caramel and mapley syrup kind of flavour there, and then as it kind of develops, you get more of the oak really coming through within it, and then you get that sweetness kind of finishing off right in the middle of your palate there. And at the end, you're left with a sort of medium range finish. And that's where you get that orange coming back through and the oak coming back through in that finish. So again, for the value, picking this up for $50, $55, just a great bourbon, my everyday pour. I hope you enjoy it. Our next bourbon is Elijah Craig Small Batch. Again, as I clean my palate, reasonably widely available for around $85. And this one comes in at about 94 proof. So small batch, what makes a bourbon a small batch? On the surface, small batch is just what it kind of sounds like, a run of bourbon made by mixing a relatively small number of barrels. But it's that relativity that makes small batch a really loaded term. Self-reported numbers from distillers put a typical small batch blend at 10 to 20 barrels. But there's no federal regulation on the phrase small batch. A major whiskey label could call its latest offering small batch if it's one less barrel than their standard output, or one more. But let's learn about Elijah Craig Small Batch. Elijah Craig Small Batch bourbon comes to us from the Heaven Hill distillery. Heaven Hill holds the second largest whiskey inventory in the world, with 58 rickhouses in total, the bourbon barrel aging warehouses. And altogether, the rickhouses hold 1.6 million barrels of bourbon. Heaven Hill, although not owning or producing the Jim Beam portfolio, has a deep connection to the Beam family, with all of its master distillers up until last year bearing the surname Beam, descended from Joseph L. Beam, Jim Beam's first cousin, who was the first master distiller at Heaven Hill when the company was founded post-Prohibition in 1935. A few of their bourbon brands, obviously the Elijah Craig, they also do Evan Williams and Heaven Hill, harder to find, but great bourbons if you can locate them, and hopefully something we'll include in a future Bourbon Brothers monthly pack. The bourbon itself is named for Reverend Elijah Craig, a Baptist preacher, a distiller, and an innovator. Now, reportedly, in 1979, Elijah Craig became the first distiller to age his whiskey in new charred oak barrels, which is a prerequisite for a liquor to be able to call itself a bourbon. Some claim that an accidental fire charred his barrels and changed the whiskey inside. Others say he stored his whiskey in former sugar barrels and was impressed with how charring improved the flavour. However it happened, Elijah Craig knew he discovered something great, and 250 years later, he's still known as the father of bourbon. Alright, so it's time we should have a taste of the Elijah Craig Small Batch. Again, coming in at 94 proof. Beautiful, a bit deeper, a bit darker than the Old Forester that we were just taking. But so on that nose, it's honeycomb. So it's that honey nose that you're getting on it. It's really good. Really enjoy the nose of Elijah Craig. Cedar in the background there, a bit of sort of marmalade and spice in there. It's great, but it's definitely get an initial oaky hit from it, but then you really kind of get some apples and cinnamon coming through, and then back to that honeycomb, which you could feel on the nose within there. So it's got a longer finish, the Elijah Craig. I'm really getting cinnamon and that oak again coming through, and it's doing a really good job sort of lingering there with the finish of the Elijah Craig. And again, a terrific bourbon in that mid-range, around that $85, 94 proof. Again, I hope you enjoy this one. Now, onto the star of today's show. Noah's Mill Small Batch Bourbon from the Willett Distillery. These are not easy to find, but not impossible, mostly from online retailers, and you'll find it ranging from $175 to $195 online. Noah's Mill Bourbon was originally aged in charred oak barrels until mature at 15 years old, but the current bottles don't contain an age statement. It's bottled by hand at around 114.3 proof. So the Willett Distillery, where Noah's Mill comes from, is also known as Kentucky Bourbon Distillers, another post-prohibition bourbon company. It's remained under family ownership and operation at the same location since it was founded in 1936. Willett didn't operate as a distillery between the early 80s, when bourbon became really unpopular and they couldn't give it away, and January 2012, although the company has used the word distillers in its name all through. The company does not identify specifically where in Kentucky its products are distilled, although it has been suggested that most of their products have been distilled by the Heaven Hill Distillery, who we just spoke about, which is located conveniently half a mile just down the road in Bardstown, Kentucky. Wherever this product comes from, I'm sure you'll agree that it's absolute quality and one of my favourites to break out for a special occasion or a Saturday. It really is one of the most lush and rich whiskies on the market. Let's crack her. Yeah, so I'm picking up walnuts, fruit, and floral are in there. So, but definitely that walnut comes through quite strong. Almost pruny. Yeah, so that palate really mimics the nose. So you get those walnuts and prunes, and definitely a good burn in there. Not uncomfortable, but a good burn with the additional alcohol that's in this one. And then you get some of that floral lavendery kind of flavour coming through, but and then that finish is kind of a burnt caramel. And it's a good, strong, long-lasting finish that really sits mid-palate within there. Yeah, that's just a brilliant bourbon. I'm thoroughly enjoying that one, and definitely will stay on the top shelf for me and broke out on those special occasions with good mates and family. So that's our first month's offerings. I really hope you enjoy them. We'll put a lot of thought and time into what I want to do in that first month, and take you on a bit of a journey through 3 really great bourbons that I do enjoy. Remember, the only right way to drink whiskey is your way, and enjoy the journey.